I think that the Niners wide receiver room is the most interesting room in the world right now as far as the NFL is concerned. There's so many different pieces of that puzzle that are bringing out discussion, whether it be what happened with Deebo and a contract situation years ago, followed by Brandon, everything that's happened with Brandon Aiyuk since then, bringing in Mike Evans, the drafting of Ricky Pearsall and Dejon Stribling, and then the Pearsall injury, sprinkle in some other young guys that might be interesting, a Jacob Cowing, a Jordan Watkins, you get another veteran in there, Christian Kirk, you got DeMarcus Robinson. There's so much going on there, and I mean this both in the near term and the far term. And then you add in the conversation we had yesterday about what I think you and I agree, which is that wide receiver contracts are a little out of whack. And so the Brandon thing is about Brandon, but there's a tucked underneath the covers, I think, result from that, which is the 49ers have now rejoined the group of NFL teams that are not paying premium dollar for a wide receiver. And I think that unless you've got somebody who is uber special, and Jackson Smith and Jigba applies, I think that's the place to be, man. I think we're not giving somebody $35 million a year at the wide receiver room is the place to be.
Unless you have somebody that you totally love and that person is going to help lead you to winning. And I think about Amon-Ra St. Brown as a great example, a guy who is that good. He got paid. And I think that this year they're going to have a bit of a bounce-back year. And I think also that when you look at Detroit, he's pretty much the only guy on that offense, as far as receivers go, that make that much money. And Montgomery had to go, and now Gibbs has his deal. And so Detroit, I think, is in a little bit of a tight window because they're paying that guy that much. But the more I looked at it, Mark, and looking at the Niners, who were 30th in the league in percentage of passes to wide receivers, and I did percentage because different teams throw it more than other teams, and so just looking at the percentage, they were at 40.5%, the lowest in the 9-year Shanahan era, and yet they went 12-5.
Right. I mean, and I think somewhat circumstantial. Usually when I see a team that struggles to get the ball to wide receivers, it usually means you have an inexperienced or ineffective quarterback. But in the case of the 49ers, I think, certainly last year, it came down to just an absolute bloodbath at the position wide receiver. And then add in that they had very elite performances and elite players at the running back and tight end positions. Right. So you might utilize that a little bit more. I don't think the Niners are ever going to be at the top of the board as far as throwing at wide receivers. I do think, again, unless there's another bloodbath of injuries, they're going to be much higher on that list this year.
Yeah, you'd like to be. And just looking at last year again, the two teams behind the Niners, they play right into what you're saying. Arizona was 31st. They didn't have a quarterback, and their wide receiver one just really can't catch the football, unfortunately. Mike Wilson's, now Wilson's the one anymore. But he was last year. Sure. The other team is Cleveland. They were dead last in percentage of catches by wide receivers, and they had like 5 quarterbacks.
Exactly.
And none of them could really throw. But the Niners last year, CMC himself, 25.6% of the catches.
Wow.
Just him.
Wow.
And the tight ends, the exact same number, 25.6. So you had 52% go to McCaffrey and your tight ends, and then the rest of it was the receivers and then like other running backs or other, other people who maybe there was a lineman who caught a ball last year on a deflection.
There was?
I think it was Connor Colby.
Did
had
he
a
catch
catch.
one?
I think so.
Yeah, good for him.
I think so.
That's a little feather in the cap for one of the big guys.
But it was just a little bit alarming when I looked at the Shanahan numbers over his tenure. The one year where they completed the most to receivers was the year that McCaffrey got hurt, 2024.
There you go.
So that makes sense. But Shanahan's generally in that 45 to 50% range. Last year was 40. This year, can they bring it back up? I think they kind of have to.
Boy, something's wrong if they don't. And then don't forget, even though he's very capable, the 49ers had a year where the quarterback position was split almost down the middle between two different people. I think it was 8 games for Mac Jones and 9 for Brock Purdy. Is that where we ended up? Purdy at times was also playing a little bit hurt. Did they call plays in order to get the ball out of his hands a little bit more? Hell, I remember that Carolina game on a Monday night where Purdy was so bad, got picked off, I think, was it 3 times in the first half?
Yeah.
And they came out in the second half with a very conservative game plan and kind of won the game with defense. defense. So I get it. I do think kind of circumstantial. But, where's the sweet spot is the question. The other sort of observation I had based on this list that you put together is you look at all, because what you sent us is a list of the teams that all made the playoffs last year in the NFL and where they sit. And the Niners are at 30th, but there were a couple other playoff teams that were down low, but some of them were like, those are not the playoff teams you want to be. Carolina, they win a horrible division. They've got a losing record. They were 21st. Pittsburgh is 27th. Their quarterback is 48 years old.
Right.
And they weren't that good either. Now, Buffalo's the interesting one. We talked about this yesterday, where Josh Allen, I do think he's the best player in the NFL, but I think it's kind of different than most people sort of view it. He's not the downfield slinger that you think he is. He's just the best fantasy football player, and he rushes a lot, and they throw the ball behind the line of scrimmage a lot. They didn't have great receivers. They wanted to upgrade. They got DJ Moore. Somewhere in the middle, to me, is the sweet spot, but all of these teams you listed, almost none of them are paying someone.
Right. As of last year, exactly.
And if they are, they did it very, very recently. Eagles, a little bit of an exception, but just dumped their guy. Seattle has now. They weren't then. Rams, they got rid of Cooper Kupp. They haven't paid Puka yet. Houston is paying Nico Collins. They ended up kind of in the middle. But the best receivers on this board are either young guys or guys that teams like A.J. Brown are looking to move off of. There's no Jamar. There's no Justin.
Right.
There's no, even Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't make the playoffs last year. There's none of those guys.
Yeah, Detroit was 12th on the list in terms of percentage. Cincinnati, with their two fancy wideouts and Yoshivash and others, they were 19th. So they completed 55% to their wide receivers. Their wide receivers put up good fantasy years, but they don't win because they have no defense. And, Minnesota's another good example. And as you go through all of the highly paid fancy wide receivers, it doesn't necessarily portend that you get success.
So where's this going for the 49ers? So they paid Brandon. They immediately regretted it. And then that story has taken on a complete life of its own. So I don't know that they're necessarily applying that experience to others. But when they needed to go out and get a wide receiver, they got one who is advanced in age and paid him for a very short period of time.
Yep.
Deebo's now on a one-year deal. Christian Kirk is on a one-year deal. Demarcus Robinson's got 1 year left on his deal. You've got a couple other young guys waiting in the wings, rookie contracts. You have Ricky Pearsall, who can't stay healthy. Therefore, I don't even know how or if or when they'll address an option year for him. And then you've got Stribling, who just got here. And I wonder, when you look at this, what's the right way? And we'd love to loop you in this conversation. 888-957-9570. Perfect world for the Niners over the next 3 years. How does this play out?
I think it's this construct. I'm not saying that this is going to work and be amazing, but you've got a veteran toward the end of his career, a little bit like when they had Anquan Boldin, or even when they had Isaac Bruce, who was a Niner, somebody who's toward the tail end, a veteran who still has a lot left or has something left. You got a couple of highly drafted guys who are on rookie deals, and then you go ahead and sprinkle in your Demarcus Robinsons, your Sky Moores, your Kendrick Bournes, your Emmanuel Sanderses. I think that the way they're building it is the right way. Nobody's making too much for too long. You've got talented, highly drafted rookies who you hope will actually work out. Ricky, big setback this year. And then you sprinkle in with good veterans, question mark veterans, mediocre veterans.
There is a scenario on the table where if Ricky were to play, if this were to go well for him, the surgery, and if he's going to get back on track, and next season, let's say he has a solid season, the Niners could be interested in keeping him, but it's not going to be terribly expensive. Here's what I would sort of say. This is my suggestion, and I don't think the Niners need it because they already do a pretty good job of this. The way I'd like for them to approach the wide receiver room over the next 3 years is to be completely unemotional. That's what I would suggest. I hope that they are completely and totally unemotional. I think they got emotional at times a little bit with Deebo. They got very emotional, both good and bad, with Brandon Aiyuk. And to me, it's a cautionary tale. Ricky Pearsall, look, if Stribling is amazing, let's say he's amazing, then fine. Then fine. Like the same thing I'd say to Seattle with Smith and Jigba. Yes, that's fine. You want to do $40 million a year? You don't have a choice. That guy's your best player on offense. So if Stribling is amazing, then fine. But other than that, unemotional and be willing to go turn and burn every single year at the position.
Yeah, you have to. And, I'm looking at the Chargers, who were number one on the list in percentage of balls to wide receivers, 64%. Keenan Allen is that veteran.
Yep.
Ladd McConkey is that drafted rook. Quentin Johnson, in his third year, also drafted. So that, to me, becomes the blueprint where if you could have Pearsall in a fourth year next year, Stribling in the second, you keep Evans, you add in a couple other vets, you need that mix of not only prices but also experience level.